If you like audiobooks or audio shows, check out a free trial of Audible. Just click the link in the description.
Welcome to MINDSHOCK True Crime. You're listening to the Stephen Allen Avery series of the Making a Murderer fame. The Netflix show that ignited a firestorm of individuals calling for justice and exposing Kratz. Of course, the documentary was heavily biased in favor of Manitowoc by only exposing such a mere fraction of their obvious corruption. That was the basis for the entire MINDSHOCK podcast regarding covering this Stephen Avery case. The Making a Murder documentary didn't even address the fact that Stephen Avery did not physically pick up a cat and throw it in a fire, according to testimony from an individual named Mr. Yanda, who admitted in a police statement that he physically lifted the cat and threw it in the fire. The police statement exists to this day. Yanda not even punished, but Stephen Avery punished, because that's how they do justice, so-called justice in Manitowoc, aka Kratz. The individual physically responsible for lifting a living thing and causing its death, not punished. Someone else present who may or may not have been involved in some drunk antics, they're punished. But the perpetrator who physically did the act, not punished. That's how they do things in Manitowoc. And the Making a Murderer Netflix documentary didn't even address such basics. Very, very biased. Very, very biased against Stephen Avery. Welcome to MINDSHOCK True Crime. You are listening to the Stephen Avery series. This is episode 35, re-examining the timeline. Because this is a very, very convoluted case with so much corruption across the board that we've gone over in the past 34 episodes. It's hard to keep track. So I wanted to do a regrouping overview, including the new information that's available, to look back with a little bit more of a 2020 eye in order to make sense of what the actions of Kratz looked like early on for the coincidence theorists out there that maintain that this was all a legitimate investigation above board, and Ken Kratz acted completely within the scope of the law in executing his duties. For those that believe that, I don't know if there are any people that aren't related to the individuals in Manitowoc County, these law enforcement agents, or possibly other authority-worshipping cultists that actually believe this was all above board. So we're going to examine all of these timeline issues in retrospect and shed more focus on Ken Kratz and Buting and Strang as well, because there are issues there that I haven't seen legitimately examined, and this is MINDSHOCK, so we will be examining them. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, you find it interesting, you want to help support the channel, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure to subscribe to the channel, hit the bell for notifications, make sure you allow your device to have those notifications come through. You can also just go to youtube.com/MINDSHOCK or youtube.com/MINDSHOCK True Crime. Like and share this podcast. Keep the awareness and pressure up on social media, which there seems to be no shortage of people continuing to discuss this blatant wrongful conviction. Again, even if you believe Stephen Avery's guilty, this is a clear example of a wrongful conviction either way. Like and share the podcast across social media platforms, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Patreon. Patrons do get priority for case topic logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You could also be a guest on the podcast depending on your tier. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. And if you're just a clueless guilter who didn't even understand the information presented, your comments will just be examined for examples of Dunning-Kruger and how that manifests and silly coincidence theories, unless you actually demonstrate you understood what was presented and provide a logical rebuttal. For some reason, that seems to be very rare on the side of the guilters, but it is welcome. If you want to have a logical, objective, neutral, good faith discussion, feel free to comment no matter which side of the fence you're on. And I'm not even saying Avery's guilty. Avery's innocent. I've presented multiple theories, all more plausible than anything the state has put forth, about scenarios in which Avery could be guilty. Split personalities, one of them psychic. I mean, these would all more adequately explain what the facts and the timeline that we have than anything the state has presented. Because if Avery has a split personality, one of them's trying to set him up, and he's not aware of it, that could possibly explain certain things. But either way, let's jump in here. Here's one of the best write-ups on the Stephen Avery case as a whole. This was posted by Tom Haas on TikTok Manitowoc, one of the only subreddits that is actually legitimate in this case. Visual timeline perceptions are what they are. This was posted approximately a year ago. I think there is at least one thing that everyone can agree on. The crime did not happen the way the state presented it at trial. From lack of DNA in the bedroom where a supposed rape happened to lack of protocol followed where human remains are discovered on Avery's property to questionable, and that's if they were even human remains, to questionable evidence popping up at the hands of a department who was supposed to be far away from the investigation. So far away, in fact, that even the former ADA, who has gone on record many times, said that Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office should not have been anywhere near the Avery salvage yard that day. I'm curious if he spoke up in 2005 the way he is these days. One would think it would have mattered more back then. Anyway, back to the point, if we go through a timeline of events and bones found and what the message being portrayed was, you'll see that both Pagel and Kratz, the duo who gave media interviews every day in the early days of the investigation, were very careful to not open the door to any possibility of the crime scene being anything other than Stephen Avery's property. And that's very curious in and of itself, because not only is this an obvious sham violating Avery's presumption of innocence and destroying any chance of a fair trial, but their obsession with the crime scene being located at Avery's, even if there's no evidence to support it, while shutting down any logical lines of inquiry regarding the quarry. And of course, Redaunt is someone that needs to be re-examined. The other reason I'm doing this timeline re-examination is because I will also be re-examining Joshua Redaunt in the next episode, because there are some curiosities that have still never been adequately explained. Everything from the birth of the legend of the bonfire to his whereabouts and the timeline of Redaunt. And these curiosities, again, we're going to revisit the entire timeline to see how they fit in. And then when we're taking a look at Kratz, Buting, Strang, and Redaunt after that, it might shed some interesting light and possible mind-shocking revelations on exactly how this frame job was executed. So 2005, November 5th, shortly after the RAV4 is found on the southeast corner of the salvage yard, around 2:45 p.m., Great Lakes Search and Rescue K-9 units arrive at Avery Salvage Yard, and of course the finding of the RAV4 by Pam of God, going into a beeline to the exact RAV4 location in a lot of thousands and thousands of vehicles at the Avery Salvage Yard. Quite amusing, of course, if you've checked out the previous episodes. Of course, she wasn't, the color of the RAV4 is in dispute. She wasn't even sure that that was the RAV4 she was sent there to find, as evidenced by the phone call and her dialogue and the court transcripts, which I went over in the previous episodes. Make sure you check all those out. An hour or so later, they are asked to go to the command post for instruction. The GLSAR search team entire report can be seen here, and this is posted on StephenAveryCase.org as well as other documents. They alerted on this is pages 3 to 7 here, Exhibit 46, Scent and Cadaver Dogs Reports. They alerted on a multitude of areas, both on the Avery property and in the quarry areas. So again, if you believe Avery's guilty. So he killed her in his trailer, then he killed her again in the garage, then he went to the quarry, sprinkled some remains there, then went to go frame his sister next door. I mean, this is what the state is, when you're putting this information together, I mean, what is the state alleging here? How does this make any sense? They alerted on a multitude of areas, both on the Avery property and in the quarry areas. And here's the other thing. If someone is planting the evidence and they're coming in through the quarry to plant it, what kind of dog sense would be picked up? Curious questions for those that really want the truth and not defend corrupt walk on blind faith alone, despite a history of framing the exact same guy. I mean, this is just insanity. And I'm going to drop a tease right here too. At the end of this episode, I'm also going to reveal another mind shock. Were there previous attempts on Stephen Avery's life? Did someone try to kill him? And why in the decades leading up to this? And of course, this has to do with these long-standing feuds and why corrupt law enforcement seem to really hate the Avery family. Okay, so here we have a map of cadaver dog hits. Shows that there are many hits outside of the Avery salvage yard, but no scent of Teresa to corroborate any of those dog hits yet. Daily conclusion, November 5th, law enforcement just began their search for Teresa by scouring the Avery property and vicinities most of the day. Cadaver dogs alert on and off the Avery salvage property to various forms of human blood and or decomposition. Let me read that again. Cadaver dogs alert on and off the Avery salvage property to various forms of human blood and or decomposition. Also keep in mind, there were no dog hits on the burn pit, and the burn pit is where the state is alleging Stephen Avery burnt Teresa Halbach's remains. And of course, the legend of the bonfire, many dubious claims there. Will be continuing to examine that, but if you haven't checked out the podcast on that, you can check that out as well. November 6th, a dog report has a quick summary of this day, noting that the weather was a factor in their attempts to get alerts. However, any alerts that they did receive, they gave to backup personnel in the command post. Daily conclusion, probably the most uneventful day in terms of evidence found in the case. This is November 6th. November 7th, Loof was brought in. 10:35 a.m. started a scent track from the sole of Teresa's shoe at the spot Teresa's vehicle was spotted. Instead of leading straight to Avery's trailer, Loof tracks to the south quarry towards Jambo Creek Road and back to the car. Coincidentally or not, the track leads the same direction that a neighbor of Stephen Avery said that he saw two cars driving into the quarry, one car driving out. And this is, of course, Wilmer Siebert's testimony here. And I'll do a quick recap here from algomaphotoandstory.wordpress.com, posted April 28th, 2016, what Stephen Avery's former neighbor witnessed. Stephen Avery's former neighbor said he saw things around the time of Teresa Halbach's murder that raise a lot of questions, and no one has asked him about it before. The recent Netflix documentary series Making a Murder has made international headlines and raised many questions surrounding the 2005 murder or alleged murder of Halbach in Manitowoc County, Wisconsin, and the subsequent trial that convicted Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey in crimes related to murder. One of the key pieces of evidence in the case was Halbach's blue/green Toyota RAV4 discovered by a volunteer search party in the rear area of Avery's Auto Salvage, November 5th, 2005. On the southeast side of the Avery Auto Salvage, off Jambo Creek Road, directly beside the entrance to the quarry behind the yard, lives Wilmer Siebert, a man in his 70s who considers himself friends with the Averys. Siebert said he saw what he thinks may be Teresa Halbach's Toyota RAV4 accompanied by another vehicle, a mysterious white Jeep, days before the search party found the RAV4 on the salvage yard. Now, some people believe his testimony is not credible because he can't remember which day. But wouldn't that make it more credible if it's something that was never taken seriously, never followed up on? Years later, he's trying to remember. He can't remember the exact same day. He's in his 70s. To me, again, he could be lying or mistaken, obviously. Nobody's debating that. But to write off his testimony completely because he can't remember the exact day, that might be kind of silly. Siebert said he was just hanging out in his backyard one day when he saw the RAV4 speeding quickly down the back road that leads into the quarry behind the Avery salvage yard, and directly behind it was the white Jeep. About half an hour later, only the Jeep returned, he said. It was a white Jeep, just a smaller Jeep, and it looked like the paint was peeling off the hood. You could see like an undercoating on the hood. The Jeep was what I saw come back out, but I didn't see the RAV4 come out, said Siebert. Siebert cannot precisely remember the day or time he saw the vehicle because of how long ago it was now, but he estimates he saw the vehicles less than a week, perhaps a couple of days or 3 days before it was discovered by the search party. Siebert said vehicles regularly travel down the quarry road, but he noticed these two particular vehicles because they were driving faster than usual. They must have been going 40 miles an hour, Siebert said. Siebert could not tell who or how many people were in either vehicle. Shortly after the incident he witnessed, the lady found the car back there, said Siebert, referring to the vehicle's discovery by Pamela Sturm, as she participated in a volunteer search party. Siebert said he cannot be 100% certain it was Halbach's RAV4, but because it was the same green/blue color, and because he rarely saw RAV4s, he's pretty sure it was. Siebert said he's been buying parts from Avery Auto Salvage since before he moved to the home in 1970, or in the 1970s. He also raised questions about how the search parties could have found the vehicle so quickly. I don't know how the search party could find that car that quick because I needed a gas tank for a truck once and they gave me the row that it was in and what kind of truck it was, and I couldn't find that truck in that short of a time, said Siebert. So knowing the exact location, he still couldn't find it. But somehow Pam of God did. And again, if you haven't looked at all, if you haven't checked out all of the Stephen Avery MINDSHOCK series, there's also some reports that Teresa's friends found the RAV4 earlier than Pam of God. So again, you can look back and check for that. I don't hear that being discussed frequently. And the exact report this is a supplemental report from November 5th, 2005, reporting officer Lieutenant Kelly Sipple. At approximately 2:30 p.m. on Saturday, November 5th, 2005, Lieutenant Sipple of the Calumet County Sheriff's Department arrived at the intersection of Avery Road and Highway 147 to assist the Calumet County Sheriff's Department and the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department in a missing persons incident. On October 31st, 2005, a female by the name of Teresa Halbach had disappeared. Teresa is a resident of Calumet County. On the morning of Saturday, November 5th, 2005, friends of Teresa were searching the Avery's Auto Salvage Yard where they located her motor vehicle off of the southwest quadrant of the property. Officers from both the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department and Calumet County Sheriff's Department responded to the scene. So that's curious, is it not? Now couple this with another report here, November 2005. So this is another report here, November 5th, 2005, 1117 hours, Lieutenant Herman's report here. Lieutenant Herman, spoke with Earl Avery. Earl gave verbal consent at this time for conducting an investigation in the salvage yard. Lieutenant Herman also contacted D.I. Shetter, advising him of the incident. Shetter did respond to Avery Auto Salvage, which time I met with him. CASO investigators and the sheriff arrived on the scene to assist. Lieutenant Herman, spoke with D.I. Shetter, who advised that he had spoken to Inspector R. Herman about the incident. He was informed that the vehicle had been located in Avery Auto Salvage and that an investigation would take place at the location. At this point, D.I. Shetter and I approached Queso Sheriff Pagel requesting that their agency take over the investigation due to ongoing civil litigation between Steve and Avery and Manitowoc County. While standing by on the scene, I spoke with Earl Avery. I asked him about the vehicle crusher which was in the yard. This crusher is owned by Norb's Salvage out of Denmark. Earl stated he had used the piece of equipment on occasion and that the owner, Norb's Salvage, did not have a problem with the Averys using it while it was in their yard. Individuals were observed to the southwest of the Avery Auto Salvage in a gravel pit area near a gravel conveyor while officers were on scene. D.I. Shetter and I walked through the yard. Again, when he says I, this is Lieutenant Herman's report. Where we made contact with 5 subjects. And these are the names of Halbach's friends. These subjects indicated they were friends of the Halbach family and were assisting with search efforts. I identified the persons and they were advised that at this time the salvage area, yard area is a secure area and they need to leave the general area. Okay, so basically there's random people roaming the area at all times. Now, they're saying it's the southwest quadrant of the property, which is curious, because this is where the friends were. And in this supplemental report by Lieutenant Kelly Sipple, it stated that friends, plural, of Teresa were searching the Avery's Auto Salvage Yard where they located her motor vehicle off of the southwest quadrant of the property. Now, who finds that curious? That's quite curious, is it not? Is it not? So even the finding of the RAV4 is suspect. I mean, everything about the case is suspect. Is there anything that's not suspect? That's a better question. Because I'd like to hear some guilters answer that. But anyway, okay, so back to Siebert here. Chuck Avery, who is also Stephen Avery's brother, has owned the salvage yard since the 90s, and he confirmed that at the time of Halbach's murder, the back of the Avery lot could be accessed from the quarry road, but since that time, the rear entrance has been blocked. Siebert said he was not questioned by police or lawyers except for when an FBI agent came to his door shortly after Halbach went missing and showed him a picture of Halbach and asked if he knew her, which he didn't. Siebert is a quiet family man, and he said that because no one asked him directly about it at the time, he never thought to tell anyone. I really didn't want to get involved. I didn't know for sure what was going on and how this was going to be handled, said Siebert. Siebert said he is not looking for attention. He is only speaking about it now because the Netflix documentary made him ask questions. Siebert said during the investigation of Halbach's murder, the police barricaded the quarry road entrance about 50 feet from his back steps and blocked the same section of road that he had observed the RAV4 and Jeep earlier. He said if anyone moves those barricades, give me a call, but he never gave me a number how I would get a hold of him, said Siebert. One evening, Siebert said he witnessed Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department vehicles driving past the barricade and then going through the Avery property with lights late into the night. So is this weird? What investigation is the FBI conducting? And if you checked out the previous episode, apparently the FBI were there on Cuss Road even before the whole Halbach situation. So was there another FBI investigation being run there? And is this FBI agent here talking to Siebert outside the scope of the Halbach investigation and Manitowoc County and Calumet County's investigation? Because he wants to know if anybody moves the barrier. Does anybody include law enforcement? Because he's stating here, if anyone moves those barricades. So does he want to know what police are doing? Because this is an FBI agent. Is he investigating police corruption here? We don't know. Okay, so Siebert said he wanted to report that someone had crossed the barrier, but he didn't know who to call. So he told his daughter, Victoria Siebert, to call local police, who then told her there was nothing to worry about. His daughter confirmed this. Wilmer Siebert said the next day it was announced on television that they had found Halbach's keys on the property, but didn't make any claims as to what that means. Which keys? The spare key? Which would have been at her home? Siebert actually likes the Averys and considers them friends. He said since buying his house and raising 9 children, neither him or anyone from his family that he knows of had ever had a bad dealing with any of the Avery family. Seibert had even been on fishing trips with Alan Avery, Stephen's father. I can't really find no fault with them because I never had any trouble with them. I always thought they were good people. They treated me fair at least, he said. So are guilters alleging he's lying? This old man is lying? I mean, somebody paid him off. I mean, this is all, the reports were at least corroborated with his daughter and the calls. And it's just, it's quite strange. But going back to the timeline here, so yeah, he saw 2 cars driving to the quarry, 1 car driving out. So this November 7th-ish. Again, there's no exact date here in this timeline re-examination. It's credited to November 7th, and it might have been that day. Who knows? Okay, now what's for sure? November 7th at the same time, 10:35 a.m., Loof is tracking the track. Calumet investigator Dietering is called over to Cuss Road because retired Manitowoc officer Bushman discovers a potential burial site that is as of yet unknown importance to law enforcement. So this is Mike Bushman, who was involved in the 85 frame-up for the Patty Berenstain assault. He was one of the arresting officers. He comes out of retirement to finish the job because the first frame-up job didn't stick. So now they're framing Avery again. They have to bring Mike Bushman out of retirement. At around 11:30 a.m., cadaver dogs Brutus and Trace and their handlers arrive for another day of work. They are asked to check out Cuss Road, and both dogs alert to the area of disturbed earth that was discovered by Bushman. And this is all very curious because we don't have the details of the prior FBI investigation in that area at Cuss Road. And or if Teresa Halbach was some kind of informant working with DCI and or FBI undercover or not, whatever the case may be, if there was another investigation prior, were they worried that corrupt law enforcement would take her out? And that's why they were keeping tabs on Halbach? Obviously not well enough, unless she's still alive and they did put her into some kind of witness protection. And they were there at the scene and there was something else going on at Cuss Road that we don't know about. And the FBI didn't want to flex on local law enforcement, so they allowed Bushman and these other officers to investigate the area. I mean, who knows? Because would that bring too much suspicion on the FBI if they were not allowing anything on Cuss Road? 1:30 p.m., law enforcement wanted Loof to track for Teresa from the spot Teresa took pictures of the van for sale. Loof started sniffing, showed interest near Avery's trailer where Teresa was confirmed to be outside of, and a magazine from her car was laying on Avery's desk in the week prior. However, what law enforcement did not expect was Loof to keep tracking west all the way to Cuss Road, where a suspected burial site was located just hours before. And of course, this site, Ken Kratz had said it wasn't pertinent to the investigation. I mean, how would he know what information was disclosed? He just expects everyone to take that on blind faith. I mean, it's really weird. I mean, he really wants everything to be focused on the trailer, the garage, the burn pit, even though there's no real evidence there. 2:30 p.m., law enforcement was perplexed, so they asked a dog handler if a scent can be picked up if the victim is in a car. And the dog handler surmised that it most likely could. So starting south of the famous Cuss Road cul-de-sac, Loof tracks south into the quarry, west, then east, ending about 100 yards south of where the car was eventually found. Loof, going so far southwest of the Avery property, would alert law enforcement to search the quarry areas in the days to come. Daily conclusion, November 7th. 2005. At this point, law enforcement should have an idea that Teresa and or her car were off the property and in the quarry areas. However, no remains were found on this day, and no strong scents were detected around the berm that is just west of Avery's residence. November 8th, 8:56 a.m., Loof was back again for more sniffing and searching. Law enforcement wanted Loof to continue the track from the day before. Starting at Avery's trailer, Loof again showed some interest around the garage area, but did not continue because of an aggressive German Shepherd. Remember, human bones would be found hours later laying on the burn pit. Once again, Loof went west to Cuss Road and tracked back to the berm west of Avery's through the quarry west of Avery's salvage yard. Today, Loof seemed to show a lot of interest on the berm that is west of Avery's trailer. The handler made the comment that the scent source is usually within 25 yards of that spot, Avery's burn pit most likely. Now, keep in mind, with all of these changing interests in the dog sense, Avery was at the cabin in Crivets, 100 miles north. So someone else is manipulating all of these remains. Like, what kind of who's planting what when, and how are the dogs responding? Because again, Avery is up 100 miles north in Crivets while all this is going on. Very interesting, is it not? Remains found around 12:47 p.m., November 8th. Manitowoc officer Jost goes to stand guard near Avery's burn pit and gets bored, so he decides to do a mind puzzle regarding the investigation. His critical thinking leads him to churn out theories, which ends with him finding what he thought was a human bone about 8 feet south of the burn pit area. The phrasing here quite amusing. It doesn't state the queso page number here in reference, but from Jost's report here, November 8, 2005, 1247 hours. I walked to the south end of the property, still keeping watch on the septic tank, while at the southwest corner of the property, I noted the burn pit area, which was located to the south of the garage for Stephen Avery's residence. On November 7th, I was asked to feed the dogs which were present on Stephen's property and also at the residence to the east of Stephen's. I remember seeing the burn pile at the time while I was feeding the German Shepherd, which was tied up behind Stephen's garage. I noticed there were some items tangled in the cable that the dog was fastened to. While feeding the dogs, MTPD officer Jason Koenig and MTPD officer Wilterdink. Have we talked about Officer Wilterdink before? Due to the aggressiveness of the German Shepherd, I was unable to retrieve the 5-gallon pails which were placed next to the kennel, this being where the food and water are kept. We were able to keep the German Shepherd far enough from us so that I could pour some food on the ground and also fill up a small water dish. Now again, going back to the evidence photos, again, check out the previous few episodes because the evidence photos tell a different story because there's a whole bunch of changing items in the area of the burn pit of who's bringing what, shovels, all these things. So clearly someone was able to easily be around the burn pit, regardless of the German Shepherd there. So maybe Jost isn't lying. Maybe another officer or a non-officer who planted the remains was mulling around the area. But in any case, the scene was ever changing throughout this whole time that we're being asked to believe that nobody went to the burn pit. Again, going back to November 8th, 2005, while I was standing near the southwest corner of the Stephen Avery property, I noted several items within close proximity to the burn pile. The items were as follows. There were numerous rings of wire laying in and around the area of the burn pile. I recognized these as steel beltings from inside tires. There was a fire which had not been burned. This was on the southeast corner of the burn pit area. There was a rubber mallet which was on the grass southeast of the pile. There was a metal hammer believed to be a claw hammer laying on the ground northeast of the pile. There was a gravel shovel which was tipped upside down located on the west side of the pile. There was a burned, charred metal scraper with a wooden handle attached which was laying northeast of the pile on the grassy area. There was a frame from a bench sheet that appeared to be from some type of vehicle. This was located in the grassy area southeast of the pile. The cloth or vinyl material which had been on the seat was burned off the frame. Still, while walking on the southwest corner of the property, I noted there were several tires laying on the ground in that corner. There was another bench style of seat on the south side of the property. This one still had the material attached to it. Earlier, when I had been in the command post area, I remember someone mentioning that Joshua Redant had checked on his hunting trailers On Monday evening, he saw there was a large fire burning near Stephen Avery's property. The fire was described as being larger than usual. And again, we'll be getting to Redaunt later. So anyway, this scene that is described obviously was changed multiple times. And again, Stephen Avery is at the Krivetts cabin. And he also states, as we were looking at the ashes laying in the area, it was evident that someone used some type of front-end loader to remove ground from this particular location. The ashes were inside the area. As we looked at the ash pile, we observed that there was a bone laying near the south side of the pile on the east side. Without disturbing the bone, I looked at it as closely as I could. It appeared as though it might have been a vertebrae bone. I could see another bone in the pile. At this time, we decided that someone from the crime lab or DCI needed to further investigate the area. Not mentioned above was that Lieutenant Sipple had walked to the pit with me at approximately 1341 hours, and he left the area at approximately 1400 hours. And of course, with all the sifting and dubious nature of the way the crime scene was processed, coroner not allowed on the scene. I mean, this is all outside of the realm of normality by any stretch of the imagination. And it's very possible, it's very, very possible Jost is not in on it. So whoever planted it, whether it was Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department officers or non-law enforcement, whoever planted it might not have informed the officers that found it. They knew it would be found at some point. Keep in mind, again, Avery's at the cabin in Krivetts. Okay, so continuing the examination of November 8th, at 4:15 p.m., law enforcement asks Loof, and this time another dog, Raz, to start in the Avery salvage yard and see if a track takes them by the conveyor road, where Calumet Officer Kucharski said cadaver dogs hit on November 5th. And was Kucharski the one that was sitting on the bed, just relaxing in a trailer, a potential crime scene where Teresa Halbach was supposedly raped and killed, at least the first time, and then again in the garage, when Lank and Coburn happened to find the spare key after searching the exact area multiple times before? That's Kucharski. With both dogs scenting together based on Teresa's scent, they don't stay near the Avery salvage yard, but instead head southwest out of Avery salvage yard towards the conveyor road and keep going west until they get to Country Road Q. The scent of Teresa for the last 2 days has been taking law enforcement outside of the Avery salvage property almost every time they are asked to track a scent. Daily conclusion of November 8th, law enforcement finds bones of Teresa on top of Avery's pit, but still cannot figure out why the dogs, both cadaver and scent, are alerting outside of the property and all over a quarry that stretches nearly 2 square miles. I mean, I think they're just not accounting for Avery's other personality, who may or may not be psychic, who's going around sprinkling the bones. They're just not accounting for these psychic split personalities. I don't know why, but they're just not accounting for them. November 9th, citizens were waking up to news that law enforcement were starting to get worried about Teresa's well-being due to some evidence found, quote, on or around, end quote, the Avery property. And this is from a Carrie Antfinger article, the Associated Press. Investigators fear for safety of missing woman. Investigators were still searching Stephen Avery's property Tuesday, Sheriff Jerry Pagel said. He refused to provide any details except to say the search included excavations on or near the Avery property. No mention of any quarry areas owned by Joshua Redaunt or Manitowoc County, even though there was a plethora of interest from unbiased scent and cadaver dogs in the days prior. They forgot to get the dogs in on the frame-up job. I mean, was that the main problem here? Around 12:30 p.m., the remains that were found on top of Avery's pit the day before are sent to Dr. Ken Bennett, who is a forensic anthropologist. Dr. Bennett reports that as soon as he opened the box he received, he identified the bones immediately and incontrovertibly as human. He concluded based on his examination that the bones belonged to a female between the ages of 20 and 50. And that's quite curious because we do have other issues regarding the bones and Eisenberg's testimony. And also, again, do we have verifiable chain of custody here, because most cases of corruption in frame-up jobs are done in the lab by either switching labels and otherwise. So without proving chain of custody here with these remains, I mean, how much is this report worth? I don't know. Armed with the visual ID of human bones, Ken Kratz makes the order to arrest Avery at around 1 p.m. Avery is arrested on an unrelated gun charge that starts chatter at the Calumet County Dispatch Center. And of course, I went over this before too, because the gun wasn't even Avery's. Okay, the officer asks the dispatcher to keep it a secret, so naturally she lets the cat out of the bag a short time later. Dr. Bennett is... And these are dispatchers gossiping about the Stephen Avery arrest, November 9th, 2005, 1:05 p.m. And you can hear this this clip here regarding this.
Hi, Joe.
Keep this under your hat.
Under my hat. That'll work.
Stephen Avery's coming here.
Oh, beautiful. When?
Sometime today.
Okay. Arrested, I take it there?
On an unrelated charge.
Okay.
Possession of a firearm.
Oh. Okay.
All right.
Thanks so much.
And possession of a firearm is an interesting charge, because if his landlord owns a gun, how is that in Stephen Avery's possession? I mean, again, we won't get into that. I went over that in previous podcast episodes. Okay. Dr. Bennett is identifying the bones as human, and Avery is getting arrested on an unrelated gun charge after Bennett's visual ID of the human bones. Law enforcement is following up on the cadaver dog hits. The scent dog tracks to see if anything of value is found in the quarry areas surrounding Avery Salvage Yard. Around 2 p.m., Kelly Sipple calls Captain Paul Roosh to tell him that they found many more human bones in quarry areas.
Calumet County Sheriff?
Hey, Joyce. Kelly.
Yes.
Can I speak to the captain, please?
Yes.
Kelsey,
Hey, Paul.
what's up?
Did you hear? There are human bones that we found?
I heard about some of them, yes.
Yep, okay. We got another pile that we found.
Okay.
Bone in, and our crime scene has now expanded by about 2 miles. What we're looking at doing is trying to find, there's no way we can organize a search this evening. We're trying to find law enforcement staff for tomorrow morning to start searching. And I don't have a state patrol supervisor.
Okay, I'll call them. How many people are you looking for from them?
You know, if we can get up to at least 40, that'd be great.
Okay. What time?
And 8 o'clock tomorrow morning.
Okay.
At the command post.
Okay.
And then if you can check with the PDs, see what if they can provide any staff. I want law enforcement. At this point, we're not sure if we really want firemen. We want to stick with. We know what we're looking for evidence-wise, and we kind of want to stick with that.
Okay.
I got Crutzen up at command post. I'm just covering a corner right now. And when I get back, I think he can provide us some manpower as well. So from Kaukauna PD.
Okay. And Drunen?
Yeah.
Yeah. You got some scratch paper there?
Now what he's doing is he burned her in the backyard, and that was a real small pile that was left. And we got 2 5-gallon pails full down at this other site about 1.5 miles, 2 miles away, about 1.5 miles away probably. And we got a few, we got more pails full out along the way somewhere. So.
Okay.
So they've got pails full of bones between 1.5 miles and 2 miles away from Avery's. What are these pails of bones? I mean, this is curious, and this is all swept under the rug, never to be mentioned again. Quite curious. Part of the theory was that the pile on Avery's pit was very small, and more quantities were found away from the yard than near Avery's trailer. This working theory and the human bone piles found around the quarry corroborate the scent and cadaver dog work that had preceded these findings the day before. Again, we have to keep in mind the dogs were not in on the frame-up. They didn't know about the frame-up. Daily conclusion, Stephen Avery is arrested for a gun possession which was ignored for 4 days with the help of a visual ID of human bones found laying on a pile on top of his burn pit. In the background, law enforcement keeps working to look for evidence, beginning to focus their attention away from Avery salvage yard and in the quarry areas. And also, again, we have to keep in mind that the burn pit site looked completely different in all these photographs. So somebody was altering the site while Stephen Avery was at the cabin in Crivets 100 miles north. Okay, November 10th, a day after Avery's arrested, local citizens are waking up to the news that significant evidence was found on the Avery salvage yard, but law enforcement refused to go into details the day before. The evidence, as we know today, of course, includes the pile of bones that were ID'd as human female, 20 to 50 years old, just the day before. While immediate details have not been released to the public, law enforcement knows from their investigations that Teresa, her car, her scent, and human remains were found on both the Avery property and the quarry owned by Manitowoc County. They also know that dogs seem to show a lot more interest in the quarry areas than in the Avery salvage yard. So if we're going according to guilt or logic, so-called logic, wherever you find the bones, they're guilty. So that means that Manitowoc County officials are guilty of murdering Teresa Halbach because a majority of bones were found. And if we're not even getting into IDs, because even the bones, even the so-called remains found on Avery's, they don't match Teresa Halbach definitively. If you haven't checked out the DNA for Dummies episodes, check those out on MINDSHOCK and the Stephen Avery case. So they could not rule out Halbach. They also could not rule out a large percentage of the population. So those bones could have been a variety of other individuals. Could have been Carmen Bootwell, possibly. Could have been Christine Rudy. Who knows? There's a lot of weird issues in this case. News conference, November 10th, 1:30 p.m. A news conference is scheduled to fill the media and the public in on some of the happenings, and maybe even perhaps what caused law enforcement to expand their crime scene by about 2 miles south, according to Kelly Sipple. What the media and the public are not aware of is the fact that Dr. Bennett has visually examined the bones allegedly found on top of Avery's pit and gave a definite positive human ID. What most of the media and the public are not aware of is that the dogs and law enforcement showed a lot of interest in the quarry areas that were 1 to 2 miles south of Avery salvage yard. The press conference starts out with Pagel making the introductory statement. Well, as I am sure everybody is aware, the scope of the investigation is now criminal in nature, and we are classifying it as a homicide investigation. It appears that an attempt was made to dispose of a body by incendiary means. However, that attempt was not completely successful. Pieces of human teeth were found on the Avery property, and the bone has been determined to be that of an adult female. The teeth are also that of a human being. Pagel starts off with an announcement that law enforcement is positive that the bones were found on the Avery property are human in nature. The first question is if the remains are Teresa. Pagels has a reasonable response, but Kratz chimes in, reiterating something he seemed so sure about that day, but yet seemed to shy away from in 2007 at trial time, only 2 short years later, emphasized here. Question: how likely do you believe that remains that were found were that of Teresa Halbach? Pagel says, out of respect for the Halbach family, we want to wait until the crime lab has provided proper identification. Kratz states, what we're releasing at this time is that forensic anthropologists and forensic odontologists have determined that with 100% certainty, the bone evidence that has been recovered is that of an adult female. That is human remains, and that the teeth are human teeth. From that perspective, we will wait for additional forensic evidence. So he's claiming 100% certainty adult female. When asked about the possible other crimes being found during the investigation, possible crimes that could sway the perception away from Avery salvage yard. Question: are your investigators finding evidence of other crimes out there at the same time they are investigating the disappearance? Pagel says, I do not wish to divulge the information at this time. Another follow-up question about where the human remains were found. Question: can you tell me about where the human items were found or how? Pagel says they were discovered on the Avery property near the residences of the Averys, and I will indicate they were discovered near Stephen Avery's residence. Notice no mention of the quarry. For 3 days prior to this news conference, most of the action and human bone piles would be found in the quarry. Again, according to the transmissions here, pails of human bones. Pails! I mean, that's a lot of bones. More evasion from Kratz. Question: when were the bone fragments and the blood found, and were they big pieces or small pieces? Pagel says there were numerous pieces of bones in different degrees of size. Kratz says, but I think to comment further on that isn't really, the blood was found immediately. It was found Saturday. We knew about blood on the interior of Teresa's vehicle already on Saturday, the first day we executed search warrants. The bone and other evidence has been discovered throughout this investigation. Notice no specific mention of the quarry when mentioning the bones. Daily conclusion. November 10th. The press conference centered around keeping the narrative around Stephen Avery's property. Media reports are now swirling due to the press conference that human bones were found on the Avery salvage yard property near Stephen Avery's residence. This, of course, is only part of the truth, as more piles would be found away from Stephen Avery's property. The media and the public will not hear of those piles or that activity today or any other day. Now, again, let's get some perspective here. In any other case, let's say you have some sprinkling of remains, and you have massive pails of bones in another area. If the massive pails of bones in another area were completely hidden from the public, from the trial, what would people think of such a case? Like, let's say you have one individual, he's accused of murder, and there's some sprinkled ashes or something, some cremains or tiny fragments in some area on his property, which he might have not even used, and that were found while he was away. And then there's pails of bones, admitted pails of bones with recordings of transmissions mentioning these pails of bones, and that an ongoing investigation into these pails of bones, and it's just never mentioned again. Would people think that was an up-and-up investigation and a fair trial? I mean, it's just mind-shocking. For whatever reason, in the Stephen Avery case, all of this is okay, but in other cases, it would raise an eyebrow. November 11th. Media reports are being released with headlines such as "Bones Found on Avery Land," which of course focuses the narrative only on the Avery property and the Avery family. No mention in that paper about the quarry activity the days prior. As the day rolls on, other papers are also releasing the information that the visual ID of Bennett, unbeknownst to the media and public, was good enough to announce to the world that the bones were that of a human female. The visual ID would not be relied upon at trial when it came to the 4 piles of human bones found in the quarry. There is no mention in the media of the many buckets and piles of evidence recovered from the quarry area that just 2 days prior was discussion of law enforcement over the dispatch phone. November 13th, with all of the focus on Stephen Avery, his property, the Avery salvage yard, and no mention of a quarry and other possible suspects or a coherent theory, things were looking grim for Stephen and his civil case that he had against Manitowoc County. Even though he could still pursue the civil case while incarcerated, the media was already reporting about how weak his civil case was in the eyes of the public. Man, there really was no evidence of widespread journalistic integrity even back then, was there? Wow, this is crazy. I mean, the headlines, Avery's $36 million civil case up in the air. Facts and lawsuit remain unchanged, but Halbach case would be hard for a civil jury to ignore. I mean, what does one have to do with the other? I mean, even if Avery did murder Teresa Halbach, with all of his split personalities, some of them psychic, even if that happened, how does that change the 85 frame up? Or all the years he spent in prison while innocent. And he could very well still have an additional lawsuit that all that time in prison made him crazy and made him into a murderer. Again, all due to corrupt and or incompetent law enforcement. I mean, yeah, this is all very, very mind-shocking. Fast forward to 2006, January 12th, Eisenberg meets with Fassbender to discuss progress, and later that same day is contacted by Mark Weigert and given more bones that allegedly came from the top of Avery's pit. However, this is the same day that evidence processing took place. Part of this evidence processing was processing burn barrels in all of the 5-gallon buckets that were found in the quarry areas on November 11, 2005. You can see the photos were taken January 12, 2006. Another view of the buckets can be seen in the background of this photograph. It seems interesting that Eisenberg receives a call from Weigert, who just finished processing quarry buckets and burn barrels. None of this information would make it into the media or the public. January 15th, Eisenberg gets another call from Weigert with more bones for her to examine. This time, it contains 2 tags of interest. 8675, the pelvic bone from the quarry, as well as 8674, recovered from burn barrel number 2, the deer camp. None of this information is being released to the public, as law enforcement cannot figure out why human bones are being recovered from areas outside of the Avery property. And again, if you haven't checked out the Burn Barrels podcast on MindShock, check that out. There's so much funny business with the burn barrels, chain of custody issues. I mean, this is just never-ending insanity with the Avery case, and still quite mind-shocking how anybody can allege this is all above board. Again, whether Avery's guilty or innocent, clearly none of this is above board. February 19th, Eisenberg re-examines the pelvic bone 8675, but also photographs other tags of interest, including human bones from 7964 and 8140 that contained human bone. February 27th, Leslie Eisenberg is made aware that there were some cranial fragments that suggested that Teresa Halbach was shot in the head. This, of course, is a big point of contention for investigators. This new information that they and Eisenberg had showed them that Teresa was shot. Since the perception is that Avery did it, it had to mean that Avery shot her. They get so frustrated that Brendan couldn't think of the answer they were looking for, they came right out and asked him themselves.
All right, I'm just going to come up and ask you, who shot her in the head?
He did.
Why didn't you tell us that?
So I couldn't think of it.
So clearly reverse engineering the coercion necessary to get Brendan Dassey to so-called confess to this crime. And again, if you look at some of these other conversations with Brendan, he can't keep focus, he's all over the place. And here you have these corrupt officials to Brendan who are these figures of authority berating him and threatening him. And he doesn't know what's going on. Even if they were non-corrupt nice guys, he still wouldn't know what was going on. So compounding to the emotional distress they're inflicting on this kid, I mean, it's really mind-shocking how anybody can defend this obvious corrupt coercion. It's just absolutely insane. March 1st, Brendan Dassey is coerced to give a narrative that the media and the public were not aware of. It was such a secret narrative that even Kratz himself says they have now determined what happened on Halloween 2005. No mention up until this point about the quarry activities or the other human bones that have been recovered and identified up to this point of the investigation. A clear about face from their actions in November 2005. However, they stayed consistent in the manner that they continued to focus all the details they released to be about Avery and his property. April 10th to 11th. On these days, over a month after Brendan Dassey is arrested and the rape, torture, killing on the Avery property is published to the media and the public, Leslie, Calumet, Manitowoc, and DCI personnel all met to finally process all of the 5 gallons of pails found all over the quarry areas. Notice you'll find good old Manitowoc County Detective Remacher still involved in the case. Interesting items. were recovered, including what looked like blood-stained rock, possible bones, human bone fragments, a bunch of other expletive. None of the items found above were ever disclosed to the media. No press conference was held to expand on the working theory that Ken Kratz and law enforcement held. Again, in an above-board case, are these the actions that would be taking place? So they arrest Brendan Dassey, and they still don't process any of these human remains and bones, or potentially human remains and bones, found all over the quarry matching the dog scents. Nobody's interested. It's really weird. It's really weird, is it not? April 25th, Leslie Eisenberg examines a bunch of biological material recovered in the last few months and makes bench notes on each tag number that she examines. Most of these items were from the 5-gallon buckets recovered from the quarry. Leslie also makes note of human bones with cut marks in this examination on this day. None of this new information ever made it into the media or the public. The theory was not expanded, nor was the criminal complaint to contain any of these details. The perception was still, at this time, that Teresa was last on Avery's land and never left. June 15th, Eisenberg re-examined some tag numbers from this case that she had marked for reevaluation. One particular tag number of interest is 7964, which is from burn barrel number 2, or the deer camp. To this day, no clear verification has ever been given. Anyway, upon further examination, Leslie updates her determination of the bone in the baggie to being human. July 4th, Eisenberg releases her entire report documenting her findings to date. Her findings include multiple human bones that were found outside of the Avery salvage yard and a detailed age and sex determination of the bones she examined. Lastly, Leslie identifies 7964 and gives a possible detail on time since Teresa's death because of some clues on the human bone. And this is her note here. The presence of empty pupil casings, tag number 7964, collected November 12, 2005 from barrel number 2 and identified as burnt bone pieces, suggests that perhaps there was an undocumented interval between Miss Halbach's death and the burning episode when her remains may have been exposed to egg-laying flies. However, it is not possible to determine from this analysis if those pupil casings were associated with the human or non-human fragments identified by the undersigned as collected under that tag number. It is worthy of note, however, that the same evidence tag number yielded the suspected human bone fragment with evidence for multiple cuts. And if you haven't checked out the MINDSHOCK episode on pupil casings, check that out. We go over that pretty extensively as well. Remember, this bone was recovered from either burn barrel number 2 or the deer camp. None of this information was ever disclosed to the media or the public. No press conference was held to expand on the details of the theory that was against Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey. The crime was still said to have happened on the Avery property. December 3rd, 2006. Eisenberg submits her second and final report on the Avery case. This report encompasses work that took place from July through December 2006, a time where Buting and Strang were squarely focused on Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office as the culprits of planting and possible Denny suspects like Bobby and Scott. Leslie mentions tag number 7964 again and mentions that it has cut marks. This bone does not come from Avery's pit, but rather burn barrel number 2, and actually produced other body parts besides just bones. Lastly, Leslie identifies many tag numbers that are human bone. Not suspected human, but directly human. These tag numbers are the items she examined that came from the quarry area. None of this information is ever released to the media or the public. The perception is that Teresa never left the Avery salvage yard alive. Fast forward to 2007, during trial and closing arguments, Ken Kratz gave the jury, the media, and the public his thoughts about what he felt about Eisenberg's human determination just 3 months prior. Attorney Kratz, so the bones in the quarry are really not evidence in this case. And so Mr. Strang has made a big deal out of showing you maps and a little flag and things like that about possible bones. Again, speculation, conjecture, is not part of this case. Facts are going to be what decides this case. And that's almost comical in nature because they've provided no facts that Avery or Dassey committed any crime here. If you notice what Kratz does, he says the quarry burns are not evidence in this case. He says this, of course, because Eisenberg only testifies in reference to the quarry about tag 8675, the suspected human pelvic bone. Neither the state or defense ask her specifically about the bones she deemed as human in her December 2006 report. The public perception is that all of the bones were found on the Avery property and that Stephen Avery murdered Teresa on Halloween 2005 with the aid of Brendan Dassey. No mention was made of the strong dog interest nearly 2 miles south-southwest and the many buckets of piles that recovered human bone. Now, I don't know why the guilters are so desperate to ignore all of this if they claim they really are after the truth. So did someone else get murdered in the quarry? Because they're saying they're human bones. They were identified as human bones. And if we're saying that identification cannot be definitive, well, what about the bones that are supposedly Teresa's? So it's really weird where it's convenient to hallucinate that this is all 100% when it points to Avery. But to claim that there's anything that doesn't lead to Avery, that's all conjecture. The psychological projection of Ken Kratz knows no bounds. Fast forward to 2011, September 20th, the infamous day that the many human bones were returned to the family. Many of these bones were found on January 12th, 2006. During evidence processing. To give you a visual of just some of the tags and bags that were returned, see here. You'll note that item 7964, the bag that was identified as human in the summer of 2006 by Eisenberg, was part of this group. None of this was ever reported to the media or the public. Heck, this action violated Stephen Avery's rights, if by nothing else, not notifying him or his lawyer of biological evidence being returned. So wait a second. They're returning bones found in the quarry to Teresa Halbach's family? If they're not pertinent to this case, then why would they be returning? If they're not Teresa Halbach, why are they being returned to her family? I mean, these are questions that need to be answered, and nobody's answering them. I mean, I don't know what to make of this. The MindShock listeners, feel free to give your thoughts on this. This is all quite mind-shocking. The conclusion here from the onset of their defense of Avery, Buting and Strang had the right track but the wrong targets. The targets were Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office and their civil lawsuit. Ken Kratz was more than happy to have that be the case in chief of his opponents because he knew all too well that the energy would be spent there and not in the quarry, where neither the media or the public knew anything about the many pieces and cents of Teresa Halbach. The tunnel vision wasn't necessarily only with Manitowoc County and Queso, it was with Pagel and Kratz from the early days of November 2005. So yeah, it's all very, very curious. It's all very, very curious. There's no mention, again, also of this FBI investigation taking place prior to Teresa Halbach, possibly having to do with Teresa Halbach being a CI, possibly not. Again, if you haven't checked out the previous episode, make sure you check out the previous episode. But when you're looking at the totality of the timeline and how Kratz was trying to fool everybody, it all makes a lot better sense when you're looking at it in hindsight. And again, Kratz, Manitowoc, they never knew that there would be this level of scrutiny levied upon their corruption and frame-up of Stephen Avery. And this is without even getting into all of the coincidences with Christine Rudy, with Carmen Bootwell. I mean, there's just a never-ending stream of coincidences and anomalies that the guilters just stick their head into the sand, nothing to see here, all on the up and up. You don't see this in other cases. In legitimate up and up investigations and cases and rightful convictions, you don't see any of this. So it's just really, really bizarre how the guilters desperately cling to the words of Ken Kratz, which are conflicting in and of itself, but there's really no substance to anything said here, and it's very obvious on how this is framed in hindsight. At the time, it was a little more difficult, and all these muddying of the waters regarding chain of custody and all these things, was that all by design as well? Or was it a combination of incompetence and corruption? Because obviously, there's no evidence that every single member of Manitowoc was in on this frame-up. It could have only been a couple people. Everybody else is just following orders. So, a few comments here regarding this timeline. No mention of blood until the morning of the 6th when the crime lab accessed the RAV4, finding it unlocked. And those, again, if you haven't checked out the RAV4 episodes in the MindShock podcast, there's 3 episodes. We go into detail the timeline, getting the RAV4 to the crime lab, all of the bizarre issues, again, that you don't see in any other case. The only blood mentioned prior was blood in Stephen Avery's trailer on a door frame collected on the 5th by Coburn. The following day, the 6th, they collected more blood from the bathroom laundry area. It's documented in the case reports and also in the Manitowoc County Sheriff's Office reports. So what is Ken Kratz yammering about? How the expletive did he know about the blood in the RAV4 on Saturday the 5th? A response here, yeah, that is the one thing that sticks out in my mind. He is so sure of the blood being found on Saturday, or he realized later on that he expletived up by stating that and had to fix it by the doors were locked and the RAV4 was never opened at Avery Salvage Yard. This case is such expletive of manipulation and corruption. So a couple more comments here. Good timeline analysis, but in focusing on Kratz, for sure a truly despicable man. You're letting Strang and Buting off the hook. They were sent by Wisconsin Attorney General Lautenschlager to ambush the case. Only days, so this is from page 161, Beyond Avery Road, Buting and the Beast by Chad Spencer Kelly. Only days before Fallon comes aboard, less than half a block from Fallon's office, Dean Strang is meeting with Stephen M. Glynn in Strang's office. Strang is a colleague of Fallon, and their offices are located half a block away in Madison, Wisconsin. Civil suit attorney Stephen M. Glynn has recommended that Stephen Avery settle and hire Strang and Buting immediately. Strang and Buting were horribly negligent, and Avery even sued them for ineffective counsel in 2012. There was no DNA expert, coerced minor confession though Buting was an expert in that area, and on and on. I mean, those are all excellent points. I mean, to have this obvious of a frame-up and corruption and violation of Avery's rights, I mean, this is ineffective counsel. I don't know how anybody can argue that it wasn't. I mean, even with everything stacked against them by corrupt judges and the corrupt state, it still doesn't explain why they didn't even attempt to pursue these things unless they were compromised, or they were in on it, or they are just really well-meaning incompetents. But it doesn't seem that they're that incompetent from their interviews. Then again, they did have a pretty good media tour as fallout from the case, so who knows what kind of compromising took place, if any. This is, of course, MindShock, where the only thing we know for sure is that we don't know anything for sure. Over 120 closed-door, off-the-record meetings between the state and defense took place with the judge in Avery's trial. And it would be very, very curious if there was a recording device in on those meetings, because again, if we're talking about truth and justice, blind justice and transparency, shouldn't the public be entitled to know what was discussed during those closed-door meetings? Why were they off the record? Isn't this a matter of public record? This is a public trial. Bottom line is Avery won his lawsuit, and Wisconsin was potentially on the hook for $1 billion in false convictions from the Innocence Project. From page 30, Beyond Avery Road, Buting and the Beast by Chad Spencer Kelly. But the truth of the matter is there were 900 Stephen Averys writing to have their cases reviewed. But the state made sure none of those potentially innocent were being fast-tracked to freedom because of the possibility of a great financial loss due to multiple civil lawsuits dipping into the state budget. If all 900 inmates writing to the Wisconsin Innocent Project were innocent became insulted by a $25,000 cap-off and petitioned on average for a $1.1 million in compensation, as Stephen Avery will, then the state budget would be hit hard in the pocket for claims of up to $1 billion. Simply, a new forensics DNA testing was a threat. Thus, Attorney General Lautenschlager assured that the backlogging of the state crime lab was a must. Okay, now here is potentially the biggest mind shock as of yet, and it's not even directly related to Stephen Avery. Now, even the most ardent coincidence theorist, the most authority-worshipping cultist, has to admit, I mean, I would think, I don't know how many Dunning-Kruger goofs think that there's not a single innocent person in prison, but there's 900 potential wrongful convictions. Now, some of those could really be guilty people, obviously. I mean, even if we say 50% is guilty. I mean, it's still astronomical. They could, if the state, so people go on and on about Avery's $36 million lawsuit against Manitowoc, that's pennies compared to upwards of $1 billion in liability and compensation to all these other wrongful convictions. Because we know how they do business in Wisconsin. I mean, it's fairly obvious from the Stephen Avery case. But even if only half of these individuals are innocent, now all of a sudden the state crime lab is backlogged with DNA testing. I mean, again, you have to look at it just from a purely budgetary point of view. There's a lot to lose here for the state. This isn't just about $36 million. If we put, for the people that say, oh, there was no way they would get Strang and Buting in on it, when you're talking about upwards of $1 billion, paying off a couple of people for a couple $100,000 or even $1 million or even some threats, that's nothing. I mean, are guilters really that clueless about how corruption works and basic human psychology? As if state or government officials have never taken payoffs in the history of the United States. I mean, come on. I'm not saying that happened here. I'm saying to deny that that's a possibility, how silly is that? To deny that humans are capable of being corrupt and taking payoffs, being in on schemes, or dare I say conspiracy, more than one individual, acting in a nefarious fashion. There's upwards of $1 billion on the hook here. This is well beyond Avery and his $36 million lawsuit. So when you keep that in mind, does it make more sense that Strang and Buting could have been compromised? And that's without even going on to the direct connections with individuals like Lautenschlager. Here's another comment here. Excellent post. The only part I'd strongly disagree with would be the part of Buting and Strang having the right track but the wrong target. I mean, if that were true, what was their track and who was their target? To me, it's obvious they had no clear track and certainly no definitive targets. There were so many opportunities for them to impeach witnesses, discredit experts, and clarify perceptions, which they simply let go by the wayside. It's unimaginable. They were soft on everyone they could have easily hammered, like firing an arrow into the bullseye of a target. Instead, what they did was more like lobbing water balloons over the target so no one got wet. I don't know when people are going to be able to put aside the impression of those two men from making a murderer. Hell, I really wanted to like them too, and accept what it really was, and that is, Buting and Strang were complicit with the state and never approached putting on a vigorous defense of Stephen Avery's rights. There is not one aspect of their defense where anybody can say they fought and they fought hard. Sad but true. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying these two men are evil, but I feel it's more likely they caved into peer pressure and just didn't really challenge the state. And that's an interesting post here on Reddit regarding Strang and Buting. Again, we don't know what the real truth is. Did they start off not compromised and then became compromised? I don't know. But there's such a lack of comparison to how cases and investigations are handled where there is no conflict of interest, or where there is a conflict of interest and it's yielded, because again, all of the planted evidence is being found by Manitowoc County officials. I mean, is that not suspect? I mean, it's just the whole case should have been thrown out from the get. I mean, it's just so mind-shocking. I mean, there are known serial killers with definitive evidence that get their cases thrown out because of because of paperwork issues or whatever, procedures not followed. And here you have just this landslide of corruption, and the case isn't thrown out, and no evidence of guilt. Where in other cases, you have the murderers, that everybody knows they did it. There's physical evidence, there's witnesses, there's just so much evidence, but they didn't follow protocol, they didn't follow the letter of the law, and their murderers are out in the street. And yet here you have innocent people where nothing was followed, and they're in prison. Or potentially innocent. I know there's a lot of guilters, they just vehemently maintain on blind faith and blind faith alone, in the words of the corrupt like Ken Kratz, that Avery's guilty. It's really bizarre. So here's another post here commenting on this. I think the biggest problem faced by Buting and Strang was the sheer volume of information and the amount of time they had to examine everything. Would need to hire a whole team to scour discovery and find everything wrong. The biggest mistake the defense did was to play by the rules while the other side cheated. How can anyone win if the other side cheats? Hides discovery, mislabeled discovery, lied to by the state. They were good attorneys with a dumpster fire. They aren't cutthroat, and they needed to be in Ken Kratz's courtroom. Lloyd, the public defender, dropped the ball. He could have worked on discovery, but it piled up and then was given over to Buting and Strang in one large lot. They had 8 to 9 months to work on this. They also trusted that investigators did their job. And is that just making excuses for Strang and Buting? All right, so let's move on here to the mind shock everybody has been waiting for. Was there an attempt on Stephen Avery's life all the way back to January of 1982? Or was this all just coincidental as well? So this is an article from Manitowoc Herald-Times, Manitowoc, Wisconsin, January 30th, 1982, Saturday. Manitowoc County Sheriff's Department traffic accident. Stephen A. Avery, 19, Route 2, Two Rivers, suffered forehead laceration late Friday night when he was struck by van truck. What is a van truck? While walking across Highway 163 just south of Two Creeks. Vehicle was driven by Charles D. Ball, 36. Of Xander Road, MINDSHOCK. And if you haven't checked out the Xander Road curiosities and coincidences, you can check those out on MINDSHOCK. According to report, Avery had walked across the roadway and was retracing his steps when accident occurred at about 11:55 p.m. He was listed in stable condition at Two Rivers Community Hospital. So is this a case of Avery innocently crossing a road at midnight and getting struck? Or was this an attempt on his life? Now, there's really not much to go on here, but it would be curious to note if anything happened to Charles D. Bowles striking a pedestrian potential. I mean, this could have potentially killed Stephen Avery. And other issues, because we have this long-standing history of everybody in Manitowoc hating the Averys, these family feuds, these disputes over land. Of course, the Avery Salvage Yard is surrounded by Redont property and Manitowoc County property. All very, very curious, that demands more examining to truly objective, neutral, logical individuals that are really out there for the truth. I mean, this really is a case unlike any other. Plenty more to examine in the coming episodes. Believe it or not, we still haven't even gone over everything in this case. Is it obvious yet? Are there any guilters left that are not related to Manitowoc officers or Wisconsin state officials? I don't know. Thanks for joining us for another edition of MINDSHOCK True Crime. If you enjoyed the podcast, find it interesting, want to help support the podcast, you can donate to our PayPal. Just check the link in the description. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast. Hit that bell for notifications. You could also just go to youtube.com/MINDSHOCK or youtube.com/MINDSHOCK True Crime. Hit the like button. Share this podcast across social media platforms. help keep awareness up, not just in this wrongful conviction, but in other wrongful convictions as well. Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, Patreon. Patrons do get priority. Case topic, logical analysis, co-podcaster requests. You can also be a guest on the podcast depending on your queue. Questions, comments, theories, thoughts, suggestions, rebuttals, debunkings of any kind, leave them in the comment section. This is Bruce McGuire signing off. Catch you guys next time.